The hot stove is heating up around the St. Louis Cardinals, and if you're a fan that really likes Brendan Donovan, just be careful where you put your finger near that hot burner. We'll talk about the Brendan Donovan trade rumors and whether we really think the Cardinals will move him coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Thursday, November 13th, 2025, and today we're talking about the latest in Brendan Donovan trade rumors as the general managers' meetings took place this week in Las Vegas, Nevada, and according to a report, it is plausible that Brendan Donovan's name was really at the center of it all this week in Las Vegas. Derek Gould of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch has a story that he posted earlier today to STL Today, which is entitled, Cardinals All-Star Brendan Donovan Among Most Coveted Hitters in Trade Deadline Talks. It's according to Derek Gould's sources with the Post-Dispatch. And that's not a surprise to me. I think I told you at some point in September in one of our B-Schaeff Daily episodes, it was right after I saw that article post from Katie Wu that kind of soft launched the rebuild, as I called it, let everybody know what was coming from this new regime, that I said, yeah, Brendan Donovan is as good as gone. And nothing I've seen since then tells me any differently. Chaim Bloom had his press conference at the end of the season, and he did address a question pertaining to those players that are worthy of contract extensions. Would they be guys that the Cardinals would build around, would sign long-term, or would the Cardinals pretty much just kind of take the Tampa Bay Rays approach of things? Hey, if a guy's getting too close to free agency, if he's got a couple of years of arbitration eligibility left, yep, time to cut the cord, time to cash in the chips and get what you can for those quality assets because, well, this version of the rebuilding Cardinals just aren't going to give anybody contract extensions. And Chaim Bloom didn't say at the time that was, guaranteed to be the case. He gave a little spiel about the idea that the right player, they would certainly be willing to engage in contract extensions for the right player and person and clubhouse presence and contributor and all those attributes that really embody Brendan Donovan without saying Brendan Donovan's name. But I just don't believe the Cardinals at this point in time are going to line up timing-wise with what they're looking to accomplish and what Brendan Donovan and his march toward free agency is destined to look like. I think it's a mistake, personally. I think the Cardinals should sign Brendan Donovan to a contract extension this winter. I say that knowing full well they're not going to do it, but I can still speak my mind and say that I don't believe that that's the right approach. But if you are going to trade Brendan Donovan, I think the reaction to it is going to depend in part upon what you're getting back. How Cardinals fans are going to feel about it, it's going to depend upon what you got in return for a really good player, a winning player, a guy who's got versatility, a guy who has developed at the plate, has a really attractive profile there, can play multiple positions, can get on base, can hit for a little power, is a great presence in the clubhouse. You talk about having a young team and looking to kind of usher in that next era. Well, Brendan Donovan is a perfect guy to have around. But I just think they're gonna be a year or two off from the timing that would be necessary to take a player like Brendan Donovan and lock him up and have him be part of the next regime rather than cash in the chips and see what you can get for him via trade. Because the Cardinals in 2026 are going to have a pared down version of a payroll. I think it's going to be lower than it's been in a long, long time in St. Louis. I think it's going to be lower than it was here in 2025 when you consider that the Cardinals are full scale trying to trade away the veterans. Arenado is gone. Sonny Gray likely gone. I think they're going to push to get a Wilson Contreras trade done. That one's a little trickier because he's got a limited number of places he'd be willing to go to, I imagine, because he's perfectly happy to stay in St. Louis. So how the Cardinals negotiate that is going to be interesting to see. But in each case, you're looking to shed some payroll as a primary motivator. The Cardinals also are looking to get some cost-controlled pitching because we know that that's what makes the world go around. The Cardinals have not had enough quality pitching, and they have spent, even in the years where they were trying to contend, money in free agency, going out and applying the Flex Seal tape to the side of the boat. The big hole in the boat has always been the pitching rotation. And it's not that they've always had bad rotations, but they certainly haven't had enough in the pitching department. And when you look at the deficit, it just wasn't something that until the Cardinals made the commitment about a year ago with Heimblum coming in to rejuvenate the farm system and the resources being applied to the infrastructure of how to actually develop arms and get them to the big league level and then have effective, quality, cost-controlled pitching. Like, the Cardinals were just not positioned within their organization to do it, and that is a failure of John Mozeliak. It is a failure of Bill DeWitt. It is 100% on those gentlemen. However you want to assign that blame, I think more probably goes to ownership than most people would say out in the general public with just the way that people felt about John Mozeliak by the end. I think Bill DeWitt Jr. should wear more of it because I think he, kind of gave John Mozeliak the pie and told John Mozeliak to cut it up how he saw fit and sort of rested on the laurels of, well, we just are so, we're so advanced in the way that we have drafted and developed and put together a farm system that they just stopped advancing. They stopped changing with the times, and the times, passed them by. And so they had to regroup and figure out a way to do it differently. Now they're doing that. They're doing those things. The best day to start a new process and regime toward improving on some of your past failures was yesterday, and the second best day to do it is today. And today is, the Cardinals have obviously been about a year into this where they have slowly been kind of ushering back into a place where they are going to be focusing on not just saying we draft and develop, we're a draft and develop organization and repeating that line ad nauseum. They're actually doing things now behind the scenes, under the hood, to accomplish it. But that's going to take some time to, I think, reap the benefits of that and identify, and then produce the pitchers that are going to make it so the Cardinals don't have to dip into free agency every offseason for 2 to 3 starters to reasonably fill the holes in their boat and try to put together a contender. What that means is they're not going to try to put together a contender this coming season and maybe the one after that as their primary goal. That's just not going to, they're not going to be able to, at least the way that they're going to approach it, do both at once. And so because you are going to have a little bit of a gap, like sure, there's guys like Quinn Matthews, and they just drafted Liam Doyle. Maybe he's a fast mover and he's helping you out in the big leagues sooner rather than later. But you also, I think if you're going to jumpstart that timeline back toward, having the foundation and the core of a roster that you look at and say, hey, this is something here. Now we can start to add ancillary pieces and build it the right way, and we're closer to contending than we thought we might be. The way you jumpstart that process is, I think, a couple of savvy trades, maybe more than a couple. Not just talking about dumping money for Arenado and Sonny Gray, but like what can you get back for some of these guys that have real value and still have some cost control to them that allows you to pick up even more premium pieces on the way in. And Lars Nootbaar is a name that has been talked about. I think the value for him in terms of an offseason trade is going to be diminished. By how much, it's hard to say. But I think the fact that we don't know if he's going to be ready for opening day definitely does put a bit of a damper on any team that would be looking to trade for him. I don't think that's a hot take. Brendan Donovan, though, seems to be this pinnacle of a player that if there's a bidding war, maybe you come out with, a really interesting package in return for Brendan Donovan. Like I said, I don't agree with it. I think his price in free agency or whatever contract extension he signs, if the Cardinals trade him and he signs a deal with a new team, I don't think that's going to be a number that just your eyes pop out of your head when you hear it or see it. I don't think it's going to be so prohibitive that the Cardinals couldn't do it right now. Right? Again, you're going to be shedding. You shed Miles Michaelis money. You have shed, like Ryan Helsley was making a decent chunk. Eric Fetty was making 7.5. Yes, guys will get raises through arbitration. Totally understand that. But you're going to be trading away Sonny Gray money, Arenado money, and maybe Wilson Contreras money. That is from a payroll that was already reduced significantly last year compared to what it was the year before that. So this idea that I think we're just going to be all on board and allow for ownership to kind of play it like they're a small market team is disappointing. But I also understand that, like, I'm barking up the wrong tree. Like, to continue to just belabor this point forever is not going to be productive because the Cardinals they don't see it that way. And I'm fully aware of that. But every once in a while, like when they're trading away their best player and their franchise player, they could be a cornerstone if they wanted him to be. I'm going to complain about it for a little bit and tell you how I feel about it, and then we'll move on. But in the construct of the Cardinals are going to trade Brendan Donovan because he's going to be 34, at the end of a contract if they were to sign one today, and are you going to start to get diminishing returns there, and do you have to wait 2-3 years down the road into that contract before the Cardinals are really contending? And so is he really, his window of best baseball ahead, is that really lining up with where the Cardinals are going to be able to use him and win with him most effectively? Like, that's what I mean when I say I think they're going to be a year or two off in the timing of it, and that's why he gets traded. And I fully expect Brendan Donovan to be traded. I would be pretty stunned if he's not. I think he's more likely to be traded than Lars Nootbaar due to the injury situation surrounding him and the Hagelin's deformity on both heels that he had the surgery to repair. I think he's more likely to be traded than Wilson Contreras. I think he's maybe even more likely to be traded than Sonny Gray. And I think Sonny Gray is not going to be on this team next year either. So, and Arenado is 100% gone. There is no chance he'll be on the team. I would say, though, Brendan Donovan is probably the second most likely because of the value that he carries. Now, let's get into this conversation because Derek Gould's reporting mentions a number of teams, and he was out front saying, and this is not an exhaustive list. Those are just the teams that Derek Gould has sources and is able to report because he has heard from enough different people in the know that this is the case. The Kansas City Royals are maybe among the most interesting team on that list because, well, normally the Royals are not the type of team that we think of as being willing to take on a player that you're then going to have to sign to a contract. But the Royals, I really appreciate what their front office has done because they are willing to be very fluid and versatile in the way that they approach things. This last trade deadline, they were trading 4 short-term additions, even though they weren't really in a playoff spot, and they ultimately didn't make it. But they were like playing the game and trying to do well and being creative with their trades, which is, I just think is something we have. It's the opposite of what the Cardinals were under John Mozeliak. John Mozeliak was the least creative executive in the history of the sport, the final few years of his tenure. It's just, I do not think there is a reasonable counter claim to that one. He just was. Every deal that was made was predictable. It was cookie cutter. It was, by the time it happened, you knew what had to happen, trading away expiring assets for whatever you could get, and just lacking creativity and being able to trade away players before they were at their lowest value. And once the bottom had dropped out, you sell off and you get what you can. The Tyler O'Neill trade, as an example, right? Dylan Carlson, those types of things. But Derek Gould writes the Royals are intrigued by Brendan Donovan, and there has been contact with the Cardinals. The Yankees have had interest in him, we know, from this past summer. Cleveland is another team that sees a fit for Donovan, according to Derek Gould's sources. The Dodgers have past interest, and as Derek writes, the list is by no means comprehensive. I want to talk about the Royals one because that's the one that Derek was kind of leading with in his article, in his story for STL Today. And I'll link that in the description to this video so you guys can read exactly what Derek is seeing and hearing there out in Las Vegas. But I think if you're the Cardinals, you're obviously looking for pitching and controllable pitching to be able to, as I mentioned, jumpstart the rebuild and what that would look like. Because the Cardinals don't have the pitching. We talked about yesterday, me and Joe Roderick, still doing Card Central 365 on STL Sports Central every day. You can check it out on that YouTube channel. We were talking about, kind of predicting the rotation for next year, and like the third name we came up with in terms of likelihood to be in the thing is Andre Palante. And I'm not even 100% sure that the Cardinals won't non-tender him if he's due to make, close to $3 million this year. I don't think they necessarily will. I'm not predicting that they will. I think, like I said, he's my third most likely player to be in the rotation. But it is one of those things where it kind of tells you what you need to know about where the Cardinals are at from a pitching standpoint. And they just don't have a lot of guys that you can obviously pencil in just yet. Quinn Matthews, you're hopeful. Liam Doyle, you're hopeful. But I think it's a little bit early to assign a rotation spot to one of those guys coming out of the spring training camp this year. So pitching is what you're looking for. to try to fill those gaps, especially until those prospects come in. And a guy like Donovan, I think, there are some Donovan trades you could make, and that's why I said it's going to depend. The reaction is going to depend on what you get back. If you're getting back some AA prospects who aren't big league ready or close to it, and they're not really top 50 names in the sport in terms of the prospect lists that go around, people are going to be, I don't know, there might be some people who really enjoy the prospects and are excited about that. I'll look at that and say, man, missed opportunity, because I think if you're going to trade Donovan, he is a premier player, and as Derek writes, probably one of, if not the most coveted player at this hot stove season that could be made available via trade, and the Cardinals should be able to take advantage of that. They should have a bunch of teams calling them, and you should be able to pit the offers and get something that you really feel good about if you're going to be dead set on trading away Brendan Donovan. Well, the Royals are interesting because, yes, they have some controllable pitching. No, are you over the moon about it? Not necessarily, but it also feels like they do have a couple of names that are interesting. The biggest name that I would come up with and say, if this was part of a package to get something done with Brendan Donovan, if you got Noah Cameron, I think that would actually be okay. He started 24 games for the Royals last season, 138 innings. He was a rookie. Pitched against the Cardinals, I remember, at least once at Busch. Pitched pretty well. Had a 2.99 ERA, a 9-7 record, and a 3.8 wins above replacement. Now, what would scare me is I don't know if this 25-year-old is going to be a strikeout guy, or if he's going to be, if this is Dakota Hudson 2.0. Now, he is a lefty, so that changes the math on the Dakota Hudson comp. But 114 strikeouts in 138 innings, as much as I liked the pitcher, and he obviously performed well last year, you might be trading away somebody that has a sturdy floor offensively and defensively, and what Brendan Donovan brings, for a guy that maybe the best year he'll ever pitch in the big leagues is the one he just had in his age 25 season, because his FIP, fielding independent pitching, was 4.18. That's a full run and a quarter higher than what he did in ERA of a 2.99. So Noah Cameron is a name, would be controllable. I mean, he's just pitched 1 year, and so you talk about controllable arm, that would be really compelling. I don't know. The Royals might see him as being more value than Brendan Donovan. I do not, because like I said, I don't think that Noah Cameron was some kind of top prospect before the year, and he feels like a regression candidate for sure, based on the fact that he wasn't getting his outs via the strikeout, relying upon defense and some good fortune to be able to have the numbers that he had. In Omaha AAA, he had 38 strikeouts in 32 innings this past season before getting called up to Kansas City. But beggars can't be choosers, but that's also not really applicable when you're talking about supposedly the most coveted trade asset in the sport this winter. And so I look at Noah Cameron, and I don't know how the Royals would view it. I don't know how the Cardinals would view it, but he's at least a name that I think is relevant to bring up in this conversation. Because some of their other guys, you could go a different route if the Royals, because they have extra pitchers. Noah Cameron bursting onto the scene kind of allows for them, I think, to be flexible this offseason. But some of their other guys, Chris Bubich has really ascended and is a guy that, a few years ago you would have kind of looked sideways at and said, I don't really know what is he going to be realistically. He had a 2.5 ERA this past season. He did spend some time on the injured list, but started 20 games, had a strikeout per inning. Chris Bubich would certainly be very interesting, but he's going to be a free agent after one more year. So you're not necessarily gaining a lot in terms of the controllable with him. Could always extend somebody, but you could also just sign somebody to free agency. So to me, Chris Bubich, very much not the answer. Cole Reagans is another name that is interesting. He burst onto the scene after being traded to Kansas City. He was part of the Aroldis Chapman deal. The Royals a few years ago signed Aroldis Chapman, and I said right then and there that offseason that they just bought themselves a nice prospect at the deadline in 2023, and that is what happened. Cole Reagans had not performed great with the Rangers. He was a reliever with a 6 ERA. Royals immediately put him into their rotation, and he went with a 2.6 ERA for 12 starts the rest of that season. And then in 2024, he was an all-star and finished fourth in the Cy Young with a 3.14 ERA. He already fits the St. Louis area code. You like that. 186 innings, 220 strikeouts. Bona fide dude. Looked great. This past season wasn't the same. Had some injuries. And so I wonder, he's controllable, a little expensive, because I believe they've kind of signed him to a pre-arb contract. 3 years, $13.25 million. 2 years of that remaining, and then would be ARB eligible in 2028. But, that would be an interesting arm. There's risk associated with that, but you got to risk it to get the biscuit, potentially, when you're talking about premier starting pitching. Cole Reagans, I have no idea if the Royals, maybe, did they sour on him enough in the past season that with his 4.7 ERA and 13 starts, only had 61 innings, would they trade him? I would have to be very, very interested in Cole Reagans if that were on the table, even knowing that this last year was kind of a disaster for him. I would be worried because I think the Royals are very sharp when it comes to pitching development, kind of like we attribute to the Tampa Bay Rays over the years. And so would that be a case where, if they're trading a guy away, what do they know that we don't sort of vibe? But Cole Reagans would be very interesting. So, the Royals at least have a couple of names that I think we could talk about and at least feel kind of interesting. But the other, Ryan Bergert, is a guy they picked up and we acquired him during the season. And he started 8 games with a 4.4 ERA down the stretch, I believe after the trade deadline or right near it. He started 8 games, so right around that trade deadline, I think, was when he was picked up from the Padres. He is long-term controllable. I don't know how good he is. Strikeout per inning, basically in 40 innings last year with the Royals. Had a similar line with the San Diego Padres, and so for a full season, he threw 76 innings and struck out 73, had a 3.66 ERA. Maybe that's somebody that's interesting. I don't think he could be or should be anchoring a Brendan Donovan trade, though. So my thing is, just like when we've done this with the Seattle Mariners over the years, we've looked at it and said, oh my gosh, they've got Brian Wu and they've got this Bryce Miller and they've got they've got Logan Gilbert and they've got George Kirby. And it's okay, which of the names that we're looking at online, we're these guys are exciting. And the Mariners are going to say, why are you talking about these guys? These guys aren't being traded ever. Never, ever. Not even if there's a fire, right? And so are we doing that with these Royals guys and saying, oh, there are names that we could see that are compelling, but the Royals might say all of them are non-starters. We'll give you Ryan Bergert, at which point I would be like, thanks, but no thanks. And so especially in a moment where the Cardinals could have the leverage because a lot of teams want Brendan Donovan, that's interesting to me. Definitely be talking with the Royals about some of those arms and maybe some prospects because I think the Cardinals should be able to get the package, right? Even if it's Cole Reagans that we're talking about. Cole Reagans didn't have the Brendan Donovan season. Maybe they would do a 1-for-1 trade, and maybe the Cardinals would like that, and maybe the Royals would, and maybe I'm missing the boat on what the valuations would be here. There is with the Royals a little bit of a history to a precedent, if you will, to these types of trades because last offseason they traded away Brady Singer to get Jonathan India, and it didn't really pan out, but they ended up kind of having, some of these pitchers popping out of the ground like weeds. And so they're still sitting in a position where they do have a surplus of pitching. And in the article that Derek Gould wrote, he said the Cardinals are shopping for starting pitching, and Chaim Bloom spoke generally about the team's goal to turn an area of surplus on the roster into a starting pitcher. Quote, that would definitely check some boxes for us, Bloom said. So, that's not specific to Donovan, but I definitely do think that's interesting, right? The Royals, if someone is looking for a major league return, need for need, that's the most obvious spot, said J.J. Piccolo, the Royals' top baseball executive. If anybody is evaluating our roster, that's where they're going to go. And we really have guys in all shapes and sizes, guys with very little control to guys who have a lot of control. So you can kind of pick your poison for what fits your needs. There's some versatility within that group as well. If that's the avenue to help us get a bat we need, then we are willing to explore that. I think it only makes sense. So, interesting stuff there from Derek Gould. The Royals could be a match for Brendan Donovan. Maybe not the team that you would have thought, but like I said, under their current front office of the last few years, they are willing to make these types of trades and have demonstrated that, and they don't play gun shy. So I honestly think the Royals would be really interesting if the Cardinals aren't being told no to the top 2 or 3 pitchers that they would want. As long as the Royals are willing to understand that Brendan Donovan is a valuable player and they are going to have to give up a valuable pitcher or two, then I think it would be really interesting for the Cardinals. If, again, they're already decided that they're going to trade him, I would extend him. I'd give him a contract today. The Cardinals probably aren't going to do that. And so if that's where we're living, I'm going to live there in the way that we analyze this. And the Royals would be kind of interesting, again, unless they're basically telling it, well, these guys aren't the pitchers you can trade for. You can have this other guy. Okay, well, then Brendan Donovan can be on another team, right? Because I think he is a very valuable player, and the Cardinals will treat him as such, hopefully, in these trade conversations. But interesting stuff. Let me know what you think. I think Brendan Donovan will be traded. The question is just going to be potentially where to. Hope I'm wrong about that, by the way. Would love to see them extend Brendan Donovan, but I just think the timing is going to be against that happening. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.